Well, just a little bit off topic of what I was planning on discussing today, but you just mentioned you got out of a discussion with DETR. Um, there's always been a lot going on with DETR since the beginning of the pandemic. Talk about the budget discussions that you just had, and just broadly speaking, your impression of how that department has handled all of the unemployment claims, all of the issues that have happened since the pandemic began, a year ago.
Clearly, the department was not prepared to handle the influx of applications that it received for unemployment benefits when the economy got shut down. And that's not particularly its fault, right? I mean, no one really saw this coming. So it has been a long process to right the ship. I think we're getting there. We heard an amendment proposed to their budget today, which would allow for the hiring of another 200 positions over the first year of the next biennium, starting July 1st, so that they can, I think, get everything in order. They need a significant technology upgrade that we need to fund. I think overall, they're on a good pathway right now. I think there's good leadership there that is trying to get things correctly. But we know that it's been a significant struggle for a lot of our constituents. It's been painful to watch.
I'm remembering, the committee hearings kind of blend together, but I do remember an interim finance committee hearing sometime over the summer. I seem to recall Assemblyman Carlton and so forth running the discussion. And the impression I got from everybody on both sides of the aisle was just, and this is before some of the turnover at the top, the lack of communication, the lack of some transparency from the department, and as you mentioned, the frustration from your constituents. Has any of that improved since the summer?
I think it has. I think that maybe it's due to precipitous decline in applications, but I do hear fewer complaints from constituents that they're unable to get through, they're unable to process their applications or their adjudications. We know there's still a backlog and there's still a wait list in terms of getting some problems resolved. But I get the sense that things are on the upswing when it comes to communications from the department to constituents. Now, we proposed a bill to actually create a special office within DETR to be a consumer advocate. Senate Republicans have proposed something like that. And I think that's probably something we need to look at going forward to ensure that the voice of the applicants and the people that are supposed to be served can be heard more effectively. So we'll see where that gets.
And you just got out of this budget discussion. Is this something that can be solved by just throwing more money at it? Or are there other issues that, and you mentioned technology, but are there other sort of functional things within DETR that you believe need to be addressed?
Yeah, I do believe there needs to be this sort of person-focused office within the department that looks more specifically at the needs of our constituents and how they're being sort of responded to. We also propose putting some deadlines in for responding to applications and having eligibility determinations made more quickly and more efficiently, so that people know what is coming to them and what's owed to them. So I think that there are some things that we can put in place that will put a little bit more of a feet to the fire, so to speak, of DETR in terms of getting the work done. But they also need the tools to get the work done, and that's going to include some investment that's financial, not just legal in consequences, right? So that's a technology system upgrade to make sure that our multiple systems talk to each other. We've got this pandemic unemployment system and our traditional unemployment system. They weren't connected. People could be eligible for both. So there were a lot of complicating factors that led to sort of the perfect storm. And I think that we just need to focus on that going forward in terms of how we can make it better for people. That should be our goal.
Sort of like when you're talking about representing the people, like an ombudsman almost, someone who is advocating on behalf of the public within the department itself.
Yeah, it's based on an ombudsman's program. We're not calling it that. We're calling it right now. But it is. It creates a position specifically within DETR to be the voice of the people rather than the voice of the government. So hopefully that gets some traction.
Let's switch gears a little bit. I personally am quite interested in esports. It's obviously a growing industry. especially down here in Las Vegas. You proposed some legislation with regards to kind of keeping an eye on it. Speaking of sort of ombudsman, I suppose, a commission of sorts. Why does esports need regulation in Nevada?
So I'm coming to this clearly and very, very focused as an economic development bill, right? So I think that esports, as the fastest growing segment of the entertainment industry and sports industry, is uniquely positioned to fit perfectly with Las Vegas to create additional tourism, additional technology ecosystem, and additional remote work. So those are sort of three lanes of an economic development platform that we've agreed to at the highest levels of the state, from the governor on down. And esports fits all of those lanes perfectly. So what this bill is modeled on is a Nevada Athletic Commission type of body, right? The Athletic Commission sanctions unarmed combat, boxing, mixed martial arts. And if you look at the partnership that the state was able to create with UFC specifically, but mixed martial arts generally, and the Nevada Athletic Commission, we became a hub for mixed martial arts contests and the corporate headquarters for UFC and all of those sorts of things that have had a significant economic impact on our state. And so esports is a sort of decentralized entity, right? There's no primary sanctioning body. And this is a commission that would provide some oversight and integrity of competitions that are happening in the state to ensure that there's confidence in the ecosystem as a whole. And in doing so, I think that we can provide value to all the different pieces of this ecosystem to bring them to our state to host events here and grow companies here.
Is there a concern? I would imagine that there's a big difference between, the Nevada Athletic Commission regulating a boxing event at, T-Mobile Arena or whatever it is, versus a bunch of, esports players playing Call of Duty or some, a big contest, a big video game contest, as you mentioned, decentralized, online. What are they going to regulate? Is it the human component? Is it the technical component? What can a commission actually do when the actual event, while maybe taking place in Las Vegas, it's kind of everywhere?
Right. So, well, there are both online tournaments and in-person events, right? And I think you need to start by looking at those in-person events because something that's held totally online, we would really have no jurisdiction over, right? So there has to be a nexus for us to have some oversight for it. So I think, the effort is to create a partnership between the state and the Nevada Esports Commission and industry to both identify issues that would be more appropriate for a commission to oversee, as well as get those implemented. So those could be things like setting up standards for competition and developing those so that they're applied uniformly across different types of competitions. It could be enforcement of things like team roster changes or something to that effect, so that people know what's to be expected for those levels of competition. The bill specifically calls out drug testing potentially as something that the commission could oversee. So the idea is to create a system of integrity around esports generally that would allow for consumer and player confidence. And I think that leads to growth of the industry long term for everybody. A rising tide floats all boats.
Let's a little more on technology. You and I, not you and I, but you have talked before about the sandbox, as it were. Issues of Bitcoin, issues of innovation. There's a lot of other technological industry things being discussed up at Carson City right now, looking ahead to the future, whether it's in northern or southern Nevada. What are you most focused on right now? What legislation are you specifically hoping will maybe make sure Nevada's foundation has a foundation for the future beyond resorts, beyond gambling, beyond mining, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. I think we talk a lot about economic diversification, and technology continues to play a key role in all of those discussions, and that's why the bill that you mentioned previously, esports, I think is important, because when you talk about technology, it's a really broad topic, right? And it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So finding sort of those niche areas where we can focus our efforts is incredibly helpful. We did that starting back in 2017 with legislation surrounding blockchain and creating some statutory framework for blockchain operations in our state. And it's been incredibly successful to attract companies using the blockchain in their technology applications to Nevada. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars invested, thousands of jobs created. And this was all done just by creating a statutory framework, no incentives, nothing like that. This was just creating good public policy that attracted business to the state. And I think we can do the same when it comes to esports through by creating a good technology base, right? It's a niche that falls directly in line with our focus on professional sports and the growth of, the NFL, the NHL, WNBA. Everyone that's operating in Las Vegas right now has a direct alignment often with esports competitions and esports teams and leagues. So sort of focusing on that technology component of what we're already good at is a really good way for us to try to create some of that diversification.
Just to, again, finally touch on cryptocurrency, blockchain, which is obviously those are unified in many respects. The innovation zone that Governor Sisolak mentioned for up in Northern Nevada, which is its own sort of situation there. What would you like to see take place to sort of continue what you're talking about when it comes to this foundation for especially something like cryptocurrency blockchain, which is very advanced stuff for a lot of our viewers, but is also very important?
So I think one of the most powerful things that the government can do to encourage growth within the technology sector is to become adopters, right? And that's for us to use the technology that we want to see happen in our state. So state treasurer has proposed a bill for the state to start accepting stablecoin potentially as a system of payment. I think that if we want to see growth within the financial technology space, cryptocurrency and that area, that it makes sense for us to start bringing that within our own house and accepting those as forms of payment. So that's one example. Another is that the state needs to start doing more electronic records collection and usage so that we can sort of move away from paper and start recognizing and using the technologies that businesses are using on a daily basis. We don't need to be nearly as paper focused as we are right now. So I think government adoption is one thing that we need to continue to focus on. I sponsored some legislation about that a couple of years ago. We probably need to strengthen it to ensure that as we move forward, we're doing what we preach.
Finally, and not connected to technology at all, there's a couple other bills, but I wanted to just quickly ask about Senate Bill 121 about primary elections.
Okay, I got to check my list to make sure I know.
I know Monday was a busy day for everybody out there. I know.
Right.
There's been a lot of lawmakers and a lot of, the Secretary of State's office. There's been a lot of discussion about what happened with the last election, the primary and the general election, with the coronavirus and how the changes that were made to ensure safety and so forth. Back then, the Secretary of State's office suggested that this was going to be the only time we did like the only mail-in balloting. That was sort of the general thought there. What do you think, or what are you proposing with regards to primary elections moving forward? What that we experienced during the coronavirus should stick around moving forward, and what are you concerned about?
Yeah, so elections are getting a lot of discussion up here at the legislature this session. There are everywhere on election issues. So I think it's important to recognize what some of the big changes are that we're making. During the special session, we approved all mail balloting, and it was used in both the primary and general election. But that was pegged to the coronavirus pandemic. There are proposals to amend that to make that permanent, so that there's universal mail-in balloting during all upcoming elections. So we need to think about what those big changes are. And how we can align our other laws so that they match, and if we're going to move to an all-mail ballot system, we should talk about those ballots are secure. So I think that includes things like signature verification, making sure that our voter rolls are as clean as possible to make sure we're not mailing out ballots to people who may have moved and are no longer residents, who may have passed away. And I think that those are some of the discussions that we're having. Now, I think we also need to look at the changing reality of our electorate, and not just our election system. And I've proposed in Senate Bill 121 recognizing the fact that more than a third or more than 30% of the voters in the state of Nevada have decided not to be a member of the Republican or Democratic parties. And primaries most often decide elections. I think we know that. We've seen that. And for the fact that our closed primary system doesn't allow nonpartisans and minor party members to participate in the most important election of the cycle, they effectively get shut out of choosing who represents them in their government. So I'm proposing an open primary system. It's a blanket primary that allows all voters to participate in primary elections. And it really changes how we have to think about our primaries. We're no longer having a primary that chooses a Democratic candidate and chooses a Republican candidate. We have all voters choose to choose who they want to go through to the general election. All candidates go on one ballot. All voters get to vote. The top two go through to the general election, and then winner takes all. I think that's a system that recognizes the fact that people are turning away from the two major political parties, and it would give a stronger voice to more people in this state to elect their representatives in government, and hopefully bring us more together rather than pushing us apart, because the system we have now pushes us to the fringe rather than brings us back towards the middle.
I could talk for a long time, but we got a long legislative session, so we'll talk about some other stuff later. Appreciate the time.